We got stuck at the very top of the Ferris wheel. Just the two of us, strangers with nothing to say. But when she whispered, "I'm not afraid of heights. I'm afraid of coming down alone," something in me shifted. It wasn't the ride that made my heart race. It was her. The night started like any other, loud, bright, and unremarkable. The kind of evening that smells like fried dough and cheap perfume, where laughter echoes from every corner of the fairground. I wasn't supposed to be there long, just passing through, killing time before heading home. But somehow, I found myself at the ticket booth for the Ferris wheel, staring up at the slow-moving lights circling the dark sky. When I stepped into the small, swinging cart, she was already seated, poised, calm, with that kind of quiet elegance that doesn't try to draw attention, yet does anyway. Her hair was pulled back loosely, a few strands catching the light breeze. She looked like someone who'd been waiting, not just for the ride to start, but for something else entirely. I offered a polite smile, one of those fleeting exchanges between strangers, and took the seat across from her. The Ferris wheel began to climb, each turn carrying us higher above the fairground noise. The crowd became a blur of colors and sound, music mixing with laughter, the scent of roasted almonds drifting up from below. She leaned slightly toward the window, watching the lights scatter across the water in the distance. For a while, neither of us spoke. It wasn't an awkward silence, just the kind that makes you aware of the space between breaths. Then the wheel stopped. At first, I thought it was part of the ride, a pause to let people on or off. But after a minute passed, and then another, it became clear something was wrong. The cart swayed slightly in the wind. The hum of the machinery below went quiet, replaced by a stillness that felt almost too heavy. The world around us seemed to shrink until it was just her, me, and the night air. I looked down. The fair was smaller now, almost unreal from up here. The people were moving dots, the sounds distant. I glanced at her. She wasn't panicking, though her fingers had tightened around the metal bar in front of her. Her expression stayed composed, but her eyes, soft brown, touched with something fragile, flicked toward the ground, then back to the horizon. "Guess we picked the wrong time to take a ride," I said, breaking the silence. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. "Or maybe the right one," she murmured, voice calm, thoughtful. There was something about the way she said it that made me pause, like she wasn't talking about the ride at all. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of rain. The metal groaned slightly beneath us. For the first time that night, I noticed how close we were to the clouds, suspended between the noise of the fair and the quiet of the sky. And there, high above everything familiar, I realized this wasn't going to be just a stalled ride. It was the beginning of something I couldn't yet name, something that felt both still and alive, fragile and inevitable, like the pause before the world moves again. The quiet stretched on, a soft kind of silence that pressed against the hum of the night. Below us, the fair had turned into a glittering sea of lights, rides spinning, music fading in and out, laughter spilling like waves. Up here, though, it was just stillness and the rhythmic creak of the Ferris wheel shifting with the wind. She sat with her hands clasped loosely in her lap, her eyes tracing the horizon. I could tell she wasn't afraid of the height, not exactly. It was something else, something heavier that she carried quietly, like people who've learned to smile even when their hearts are tired. To break the silence, I said the first thing that came to mind. "Well," I chuckled softly, "if we're stuck up here long enough, I'm calling dibs on the last of the popcorn." She turned to look at me then, really look. Her expression softened, amusement flickering like light behind her eyes. "That depends," she said. "Do you plan on sharing?" That laugh of hers, low, steady, a little surprised, felt like warmth cutting through the cold air. It wasn't forced or polite. It was real, the kind that makes you want to keep talking, just to hear it again. We started small. She asked what brought me to the fair. I told her I hadn't planned on staying, that sometimes it's easier to lose yourself in a crowd than to sit in the quiet of your own room. She nodded as if she understood that too well. When I asked what brought her here, she smiled faintly and said, "Habit. My husband and I used to come every year. I guess I forgot to stop." The way she said it, soft, matter-of-fact, but with an ache buried beneath, made something shift inside me. I didn't know what to say, so I just let the silence breathe between us, comfortable now, full of meaning that didn't need words. A breeze passed through, carrying the faint scent of rain and caramel. The cart rocked slightly. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, her fingers trembling just enough for me to notice. "You'd think after all these years I'd get used to being up high," she said quietly. "But it still makes me aware." "Of what?" I asked. She looked at me for a moment, steady, thoughtful. "How small everything really is from up here. How far things can fall." Her eyes dropped to the fair below, but her voice carried something deeper, as if she wasn't talking about the view at all. I wanted to ask her more, but something told me not to. So instead I said gently, "Then maybe it's not about getting used to it. Maybe it's about learning not to look down." She smiled, that same soft, private smile that didn't reach her lips but lit her eyes. "Maybe," she said, and for a brief, impossible second, suspended above the noise of the world, I felt like we weren't strangers anymore. Just two souls caught in the same pause, trying not to look down. The air grew cooler the longer we stayed up there. A thin mist began to gather around the lights, softening their glow, turning the fair below into a blur of color and movement. I rubbed my palms together for warmth, pretending not to notice the way her shoulders tensed slightly against the chill. Without thinking too much, I shrugged off my jacket and offered it across the narrow space between us. "Here," I said quietly. She hesitated. For a second, her gaze lifted from the view to my face, questioning, almost cautious. Then, with a small exhale, she reached for it. Our fingers brushed. Not long, not deliberate, but enough for the moment to hum with awareness. Her touch was cool, her skin soft in that fleeting contact. She pulled the jacket around herself, her movements careful, graceful. "Thank you," she said, her voice low, threaded with something that didn't sound like embarrassment, more like gratitude that went deeper than the gesture deserved. "You're welcome," I murmured. "Can't have you freezing before we're rescued." That earned another quiet laugh from her, though this one didn't quite reach her eyes. She looked out again, her profile etched against the lights below, thoughtful and far away. "You know," she said after a moment, "I never liked Ferris wheels." "Really?" I leaned forward slightly. "Then why get on one?" Her fingers played absently with the edge of my jacket sleeve. "Because I thought I should stop being afraid of silly things. Heights, silence, endings." She paused, her voice growing softer. "But it's not the height that scares me. It's this part. The waiting, the not knowing when things will start moving again." Her words settled between us like something fragile, honest. I wanted to say something comforting, but instead, I listened. The wind sighed through the metal beams above us. Somewhere below, a child's laughter floated up and then faded. She continued, almost to herself now. "You spend most of your life pretending you're fine, busy, occupied, in control. Then one small thing stops. A ride, a plan, a person, and suddenly you're suspended, seeing everything from too far away." Her eyes glistened slightly in the dim light, but she didn't look away. "It makes you realize how much you've been holding together by habit." For a long moment, I couldn't find words. There was something in the way she spoke, the calmness of someone who had carried too much for too long, and was only now letting a piece of it slip out. "I think everyone's afraid of that," I finally said, "of stopping long enough to feel what they've been avoiding." Her lips curved, not a smile, but an acknowledgement. "Maybe that's why people keep moving," she whispered, "because stillness makes you see yourself too clearly." The Ferris wheel creaked again, shifting slightly. She exhaled, her shoulders relaxing just a little. And for the first time since it stopped, it wasn't fear that filled the air, it was understanding. In that suspended moment, wrapped in my jacket, she wasn't a stranger anymore. She was a mirror, and I saw pieces of my own quiet fears reflecting back at me. A faint tremor ran through the Ferris wheel, just enough to make the cart sway. She stiffened, fingers tightening on the edge of the seat. I could hear the faint click of machinery below, followed by a groan that echoed through the metal frame. The ride wasn't moving yet, but it was thinking about it. She drew in a sharp breath, her eyes darting to the ground far beneath us. I saw her hand tremble before she caught herself, folding it neatly back into her lap as if she could will calm into her body through composure. But her shoulders betrayed her, a subtle, rising tension that made the air feel heavy. Without saying anything, I reached across the narrow space between us and rested my hand gently over hers. Her skin was cool, almost trembling beneath my touch. For a moment she didn't move. Then, slowly, her fingers turned slightly, not to pull away, but to fit more comfortably against mine. "You're okay?" I said softly. "We're not moving yet." Her eyes lifted to mine, steady now, searching. The distance between us seemed to shrink until it wasn't about the cart anymore, or the height, or even the fare below. It was about something deeper, the kind of fear that comes from feeling like the world might slip away if you let go. "I hate this part," she admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "When you can feel it about to move but you don't know when." "Yeah," I murmured. "It's the waiting that gets you." She nodded faintly. "It's always the waiting." The wheel creaked again, louder this time. The night air thickened with tension. She leaned forward slightly, her shoulder brushing against mine as she looked out toward the horizon. The scent of her perfume, faint jasmine mixed with rain, caught on the breeze. It wasn't overpowering, just enough to ground me in the moment. From up here, the world looked peaceful, soft lights, muted music, the kind of calm you only notice when you're far enough away from everything. But inside that cart, the silence buzzed with something alive, something unnamed. She didn't move her hand from mine. The warmth between our palms grew until it became something I couldn't ignore, quiet reassurance wrapped in the simplest form of human contact. After a while, she spoke again. "You know, I used to think I liked control, planning things, keeping life steady. But lately," her voice faltered, "lately, I think I've just been afraid of the moment things start to change." I glanced at her, the lights from below flickering across her face. "Change isn't always bad," I said. "Sometimes it's just unfamiliar." She let out a slow breath, her shoulders lowering slightly. "Maybe, but unfamiliar still feels a lot like falling." I didn't respond. I just held her hand a little tighter, quietly promising, without words, that if the world started moving again, she wouldn't have to fall alone. And in that small, suspended cart, hanging between stillness and motion, the air shifted. The fear that filled it at the start began to melt into something else. Something tender, trembling, and real. The Ferris wheel gave a low, dragging groan, and the cart lurched forward an inch, just enough to make both of us tense. I felt her fingers clench instinctively around mine, her breath catching in her throat. Then, nothing. Another pause. A tease of movement followed by stillness again. She exhaled shakily and laughed under her breath. A fragile, disbelieving sound. "Even when it's supposed to move, it hesitates," she murmured almost to herself, "like it's afraid of its own momentum." I smiled faintly, watching the lights flicker across her face. "Maybe it's just giving us more time," I said. She tilted her head slightly, a trace of a smile touching her lips. "And what would we do with more time, Maybe figure out why we both ended up here tonight," I said, half teasing, half sincere. She looked at me then, really looked, and for a heartbeat, I saw every unspoken thing she'd been carrying. The kind of weight people hide behind practiced smiles and polite laughter. It was in her eyes, that quiet exhaustion of holding the world together when no one notices you're breaking. "You don't want to know," she said softly. "Try me." Her gaze drifted down to our joined hands. She hesitated, her thumb brushing gently against my knuckles. An absent, vulnerable gesture. The kind people don't make unless they forget to guard themselves. "When my husband died," she began, her voice calm but fragile, "I told myself I'd be fine. I filled my days, stayed busy, did everything except stop long enough to feel it. But lately," her voice trembled, almost imperceptibly, "lately, I keep finding myself in places like this, half empty, half full of strangers, wondering if I even know how to come down anymore. Her confession hung between us, soft but heavy. The kind of truth that doesn't need comfort, just space to exist. I didn't try to fix it. I just sat there, letting the night breathe around us. The fair below looked so alive. Music, laughter, movement. But up here, it was just her voice and the faint hum of the wind. She looked out toward the city lights, her eyes glassy but composed. "You know what's strange?" she whispered. "I'm not afraid of going down." She paused, her next words barely audible. "I'm more afraid of going down alone." The moment stopped there, everything. The noise, the creaks, even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Her words cut through the stillness, raw and unguarded. I could have said something kind or reassuring, but nothing felt right. Instead, I just looked at her, and she looked back, and in that shared silence something inside me shifted. It wasn't pity or sympathy. It was recognition, because in her voice, I heard my own fears, the quiet ones I never said aloud. The fear of being alone in the descent, of feeling life move on while you stay suspended in memories that no one else shares. The wheel groaned again, readying to move, but her words lingered, the kind that echo long after the ride ends. The first jolt came so softly it almost didn't feel real. A low rumble followed, and then the cart began to move, slow, uncertain, but steady this time. She tensed, her hand gripping mine tighter. The Ferris wheel creaked around us, lights flickering against the night sky like trembling stars. I felt her inhale sharply, trying to steady herself. "Here we go," she whispered, almost to the wind. "Yeah," I said quietly. "We're finally going down." The ride's rhythm was slow, deliberate, each turn a soft surrender to gravity. The ground grew closer, but somehow it felt like we were still suspended in something that wasn't quite motion and wasn't quite stillness either. Her head leaned slightly back, eyes closed as she breathed through the movement. A loose strand of her hair brushed against my wrist, carried by the night breeze. I could feel the faint tremor still running through her hand, though she tried to hide it. "Hey," I said softly. "You're doing fine." Her lips curved into the faintest smile, still not opening her eyes. Maybe I just needed someone to tell me that. The lights from below began to rise toward us now, bathing her face in soft, golden hues. I watched her expression shift, from tension to something else. Not calm exactly, but release. The kind that comes after holding your breath for too long. The sounds of the fair returned gradually. Laughter, the buzz of games, a faint song carried on the air. But up here, they felt distant, like echoes from another world. She finally opened her eyes and turned to me. "Do you ever think about how many people you pass in a day without really seeing them?" she asked quietly. And then, out of nowhere, someone stops you in your tracks, just for a moment, and suddenly you feel seen. Her voice carried the weight of someone who hadn't said something like that in years. "Yeah," I said, meeting her gaze. "I think that's rare." "It shouldn't be," she replied, shaking her head faintly. "It shouldn't take getting stuck in the sky to remember we're all just trying not to fall." I smiled, a small, sad smile. Maybe the sky's not the worst place to remember that. For a few moments, neither of us spoke. The ride kept lowering us, one gentle motion at a time. Her hand slipped free, only to rest lightly on my arm instead. A quiet gesture, steady and grateful. The fairground lights reflected in her eyes now, shimmering like tiny constellations. I realized then that the fear she'd carried wasn't about falling at all. It was about letting herself be caught. By the time the cart neared the ground, the tension in her shoulders had softened. She exhaled, a slow, almost trembling sigh, the sound of something heavy finally being set down. And as the Ferris wheel eased to a stop, I found myself wishing it wouldn't. Because for the first time that night, it didn't feel like we were coming down. Felt like we were learning how to land. When the Ferris wheel finally stopped, the cart gave a small, final sway, a gentle reminder that we'd been somewhere the world couldn't quite reach us. The fair noise returned all at once. Laughter, the crackle of speakers, the rhythmic hum of a distant carousel tune. Yet somehow it all felt muted, like the moment didn't want to end just yet. She didn't move right away. Neither did I. The operator had opened the gate below, waiting for us to step out. But it was as though we were caught between worlds, the stillness of where we'd been and the noise of where we were returning. Her fingers were still resting on my arm, light but deliberate. I could feel the warmth of her touch even through the cool air. When she finally let go, it wasn't abrupt. It was slow, almost reluctant, like part of her wanted to stay suspended just a little longer. We stepped onto the wooden platform together. The fair lights painted everything in shades of amber and rose, reflecting off her hair. She pulled my jacket a little tighter around her shoulders, glancing back at the Ferris wheel as it began another slow rotation. "Strange," she said softly. "From down here, it doesn't look nearly as high." I smiled. "Maybe it's not the height that changes. Maybe it's the way we see it now." That made her laugh, quiet and genuine. She turned to look at me then, her expression softer than before. There was still a trace of sadness in her eyes, but it had gentled into something warmer, steadier. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For staying calm up there. For listening. For not filling the silence." She paused, her voice dipping lower. "Most people rush to fix things that aren't broken, or fill spaces that don't need filling. I didn't mind the silence," I said honestly. "Sometimes silence says more than words ever could." She studied me for a long moment, that same curious, almost tender look she'd given before the wheel started moving again. Then she smiled. "You remind me of who I used to be, before life got complicated." For a second, I didn't know what to say, so I didn't. I just smiled back, hoping she saw the same quiet recognition I felt. The fair continued around us, oblivious, couples laughing, children running. The Ferris wheel carrying new riders into the night sky. She took one last glance upward, eyes reflecting the lights above like pieces of a fading dream. Then softly, she said, "I think I'll be okay next time." "Next time?" I asked. She nodded. "If I ever get stuck again." A small smile. "Maybe it won't feel so lonely anymore." I wanted to say something, to ask for her name, to promise another conversation. But I didn't. It didn't feel right to force the ending. Some connections aren't meant to be claimed. They're meant to be carried. As she walked away, blending into the glow of the fairground, I stayed for a moment longer, watching the Ferris wheel turn again. A quiet circle of motion, like the night repeating its own gentle lesson. Some fears don't vanish. They soften. When someone finally holds your hand long enough to remind you that you never had to face the fall alone.